Today's speaker is no stranger to the group. He presented a couple of years ago on Barbadian maps. James Webster, out there in cold British Columbia, will take us from manuscript to database, making early Barbados census records searchable and available. The 1679 census of Barbados was the most extensive census undertaken in the British Empire up to that time. Yet it has remained largely trapped in handwritten manuscripts at the British Archives or in static transcriptions. This presentation unveils the journey of transforming those fragile colonial records into a searchable digital database available for genealogists, historians, and the general public. We will explore the unique historical context of Governor Atkins' 1679 report, undertaken at a time of transition from small landholders to indentured servants to larger sugar estates dependent on growing numbers of slave labor. Many of the names, predominantly of English, Irish, or Scottish origin, found in that early census can still be found throughout all sectors of present-day Barbadian society, thus offering a unique opportunity for researching family roots. James, or Jim, is an amateur historical researcher with a special interest in early Barbados records, maps, and digital genealogy. He has recently transcribed and digitized the 1679 Barbados census and developed the open, searchable database, which you will find on BajanThings.com. His ongoing work includes expanding public access to historical maps, plantation records, and family lineages to support Barbadian heritage and genealogical research. This is a very important task, Jim. But before we hear from him, just a little housekeeping. We want you to hold your questions until the end of the presentation, and then you can either type in the Q&A or you can use the raise hand function if you want to ask your question on mic. We'll also ask you if you just want to make a comment, you can put that in the chat. Jim, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you, Harriet. It's great to be back here again. It's hard to believe it's been I think 3 or 4 years since I last talked to the group. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'd like to welcome family, friends, and people who are interested in Barbados genealogy who've joined us today. I'm hoping that I won't put you to sleep, and that at the end of this presentation, you'll walk away a little bit more knowledgeable about a little bit about Barbados history, but also the role of this census and how it can link with modern day Barbados. As Harriet mentioned, it was the first most extensive census ever taken in the British Empire, even more so than in London or Scotland or England. When you start digging into it, it's really amazing the amount of information that was pulled together. It captured land ownership, the plantation lists, not only the military or the militias that were on Barbados, but the actual who the leaders of those militias were, who the members of the militias were, what their positions were, the members of the assembly, taxation records for a certain year, and most interesting for me, a couple of things was the immigration patterns that took place during that year of 68 to 69. Who came into the island and who left? For being genealogists, it really provides, I think, an insight into your family names, and for some people who are able to trace their family history through records all the way back, you probably will find your name on here. But for those of us, or for those people that can't trace their family history all the way back, I think it's still an important document because your family name is probably linked to this, and somewhere I think, I mean, Barbados is quite unique and quite different than most places in the world in that you have all these amazing records that were held on this small little island, and the records are still quite readily available. What I find with genealogy is that it's kind of like a puzzle of a thousand pieces. And if you look at the little map on the chart on the left, it shows you, and it's a question you see in the genealogy society quite often is like, what's a first cousin, what's a second cousin, what's a third cousin, and how removed are you? And the more you get into your family history and making connections, you realize you can just go to your first cousins, or you can keep digging. And every time you meet somebody interesting, you want to go a little bit further. My interest was kind of tweaked the very first time. My dad was born in Barbados, and our family goes back a long ways. But I didn't come there until I was a teenager. And on that very first trip from the airport, from the old Sewell Airport, we were driving to Belleville with my aunt, and she says, she said, your grandfather was born there, and see that sign, Penny Hole. And she said he came from there, and his family came from Penny Hole. And I'm thinking, Penny Hole, that's kind of an interesting name. And so subsequently, when I moved down to Barbados, in a couple of years after that, and on all the subsequent trips, I wanted to learn more about Penny Hole and then all the other places that might be attached to the family. And later on, after I started to get retired, I started to dig more and more into it. And I found the genealogy group as a huge help. That's where I made a lot of initial connections because I knew very little. I knew stories, but I didn't know how all the pieces went together. And there was always somebody on there that would kind of suggest going here or going there. So those that are on the genealogy group, it's a great resource. And I think we'll talk about some of the other resources and um, the links and the disappointments you run into along the way, but also the little victories. And every time you actually connect and meet a new member of the family, and if you actually get to talk to them, it's pretty exciting. So the early years, and I'll go through this quickly because I'm sure most people know the early Barbados history, but the first people landing first under Powell. It was under a William Quarantine group, and he sent out. There was about 80 settlers. They landed near Holetown. It was interesting on the way. They were nobody had all those years before the Portuguese or Spanish, they had always sailed by, and the English hadn't really weren't into colonization much. But that first 2 years before, this William Powell or his brother James, they'd sailed by and thought it would be an interesting place to colonize. Barbados at the time was totally covered with trees, and on their way over, they ran into a Portuguese ship, and they took 8 enslaved people, I believe the number was, from the Portuguese, and they landed. So from that very first um, trip, that very first settlement, there was the European, the English enslavers, and then there was the slaved and the enslaved and so it started from there. Subsequently, they realized that they didn't know how to grow any food, so one of the Powells went to over to the Netherlands colony in South America and brought back some indigenous people to help them show them how to grow crops. Very quickly, there was another claim on Barbados by the Earl of Carlisle, who'd also been granted rights to the island, and they settled down in Bridgetown. And the two sides didn't get along, and they were kind of fighting for a while. And this went on for years, even after Carlisle's death. Quarantines people were going after him in courts in London. The English Civil War broke out in the early 1640s, and Barbados tried to stay neutral. They had a very good governor, Bell, who tried to keep the peace and got people with the two royalist or roundhead loyalties to say, hey, let's focus on developing this island. And they did that pretty well until Cromwell started to win in England, and more of the royalty royalists were leaving England to come to Barbados to escape the war. And they started to become more of a majority and kept pushing Bell to make Barbados a royalist colony, and started to persecute these parliamentarian supporters. And so that neutrality started to break down. And an interesting little sideline to this is when it was posted about the leader of this royalist group was a fellow named Waldron, Humphrey Waldron. And when I was posting about this talk, somebody had known in Barbados for many, many years posted, he said, oh, that Humphrey Waldron, my mother's related to his family. And I'd just been reading the day before an article about a John Webster, who was one of the earliest people in our family, who had been taken and shown as an example by the Royalists because he was a parliamentary supporter. And they'd taken a branding iron and branded his cheek with the T and cut out his tongue, which led a fellow named Nicholas Foster, who was a friend of his, to sail to England and got Cromwell and them to send in an invasion force to tell them about the situation of Barbados. So Askew landed, sent by Cromwell. He couldn't land. They ended up having a stalemate, and they finally ended up meeting this time with the Royalists and Askew in a pub, the Mermaid's Inn in Oistins, and they signed what eventually became the Charter of Barbados. Cromwell died, and then Charles II came back to the throne out of exile in the Netherlands. So that's your quick and dirty early history of Barbados. So Governor Atkins was sent out, and Charles, by this point, he wanted to start collecting money from the colonies, and they wanted to understand what did they have in all these colonies? Because by now it wasn't just Barbados. They had colonies in Virginia and Massachusetts and Carolinas. So they had this William Blathwaite, who was the head of the Board of Trade and Plantations, send letters out, which would take 2 years to go, or 2 months to go across the ocean and 2 months to get a reply, asking all these colonies to send back a map of their colony and what they've got there, and plus some information on who was actually living there and who the colonizers were. Atkins was, even though he'd been sent out in 1674, was very hesitant to send this information because the planters in Barbados didn't want to really give up that information because there was a tax. There was a tax, 4.5% tax on all exports, goods sent out of Barbados. And at that time, early on, they had been trading with the Dutch, which the English finally cut off. But there was also a tax on the number of acres they owned and the number of enslaved people they had. So they wanted those numbers downplayed, and they kept telling Atkins, don't send this stuff. Finally, in the end, the pressure got too much. So in 1678 and 79, he put together this massive set of records and sent them off to Mr. Blathwaite. They arrived in London around May or so of the end of May of 1679. He also subsequently sent the map that they'd been requesting that was been made by a fellow named Mr. Ford. So the history of this box of information, this census, was he sent the two boxes on April 1st. He wrote a letter. He sent the two boxes to the Board of Trade and Plantations. They weren't happy with the way he'd been stalling, so they'd already decided to replace Atkins with Sir Richard Dutton. And so he was being sent over to Barbados to replace Atkins, with the goal that he should clean up the records and send some new records over. So basically, they got Atkins' records and they basically ignored them after pressuring him for 4 or 5 years. And the boxes were stuck away on a shelf somewhere in the British Library or one of those little treasure trove places they have over in London. And they sat there until a fellow who was either working or volunteering, this John Houghton, in the early 1880s, came across these boxes and started going through them and realized there's a lot of information in here. And so he started transcribing this, and having just transcribed a small portion of the census, it's an amazing piece of work that he did. So he transcribed baptismal records, death records, a list of the landowners, the acreages, the number of servants that each landowner had, the number of enslaved people that they had, but he only got through about 5 of the parishes, and then he ended up dying at the age of 40 and not finishing his work. Well, the work got taken and published after his death in 1874, and kind of so there it was, sort of this half-completed job, and then in 1969, a history professor at the University of Pennsylvania comes across this book of Houghton's, which had been around, and he did a much more in-depth analysis of what was in the census and what it meant, and sort of showed how rich Barbados was. I mean, it was the third largest colony at that time, larger than Massachusetts and the ones in the American colonies, but it was also the richest. And we've heard lots of stories about that over the last few years about the wealth. And if you go to England and look at some of those great houses, I mean, a lot of that money came from sugar, and it came from plantations in Barbados, and it came from plantations in the West Indies. So if you're interested in this census, even if you don't try and digest the whole census, really take an opportunity to download, and we have this on Page and Things, is a link to Richard Dunn's summary. It's only 20-some pages, but it's very enlightening. Around that same time, or into the 70s, the Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church, who were big into genealogy, were going around the world, and anybody who'd let them in to see their records, they were scanning and photographing these records and keeping them in Salt Lake City. And I think it's a good thing that they've been doing that, because a lot of these records were getting old, they were starting to fall apart, and so we've now got these records preserved going into the future. In 1982, James Brandow had Holton's books and took it upon himself to complete the work, went to the library in London, and the National Library was able to get permission to finish transcribing all these records, the census records, and he published a book called The Omitted Chapters from Houghton, the omitted chapters from Houghton's original list. Now, Houghton's original list is available free on the Internet Archive. Um, uh, the Richard Dunn's is available as a free download online. Brandau's you can buy from Google Play for $15 because it's still within the copyright time frame. And then another student in 2004 was working on his master's thesis, and I don't know if he was a student of Dunn's or knew about it, but he decided to pick up that work and really took Dunn's work and to another level. And what he did was he transcribed as part of his thesis the the census, the parish records, not the military records, but the parish records, and closed that in his thesis. Um, so that leads us to where we are today, the searchable database. Now, these are all the things, I'm not going to read through it, but these are all the things that are contained in that census box, in those two boxes. I mean, there was levies, there was the amount of cannons that were mounted on the West Coast, and how many cannons there were, how many forts were, how many regiments there were, both horse and foot. I mean, it's quite something. And all this information is on our Page and Things post. So the map that I was talking about a little earlier was done by Richard Ford. And he was a resident of Barbados. He must have been a surveyor because his map was the most exact and complete map done. There was, after Richard Lincoln's map of dated 1657, there had been other attempts at making maps, but nothing as extensive as Ford's. And on Ford's map, he has 835 place names, names of landowners. In the census, there was 2,953 names, and there's a match of 673 names appear that were in the census that appear on this map. So that meant there was about 160 people that were on the census, plus a whole bunch of other people who were maybe too small to include. They weren't on the map. So I think what happened was, having done orienteering and a little bit of cartography, especially when you don't have LiDAR or aerial photographs, to actually make a map like this was no small feat. I would suspect it would have taken probably in the range of 4 to 5 years, depending on how long he was working on it, and how much time, which would take the sort of starting point of this map maybe back to the 1670s. In 1675, they had a huge hurricane that destroyed a lot of the plantation houses and windmills. And so some of those people, by the time the census rolled around, they may have packed up and just said, I'm out of here, and left. So that's probably why some of them don't appear on the census as well. But it's really nice having these two documents that were done at the same time, or close to the same time, that you can refer to, because you can go to the census and find the name, a family name, and say, okay, yeah, it says it's in St. Peter, but where in St. Peter? Well, if you actually come to the map and narrow it down and look on St. Peter, you can pinpoint maybe where that plantation was located. What we've tried to do is make that step a little bit easier for you. And we downloaded, this must look a little bit scary from your end. What we did was we matched up the names on the map with the census, and anybody who was in the census but also on the map, then we had access to a georeferenced copy of Ford's map, We overlaid that on Google Earth, our Google Maps, and imported all the data from the census and the map onto this Google Map. So you can actually on the Beijing Things website, you can go in there, and we've got a link to this. You can go in there and you can actually click on every one of these little bubbles, or you can go down the side and click on the plantation you're interested in, and the information will pop up and it'll tell you, okay, there's Ball. Ball's name was on the map. James Ball was in the census. His plantation was in St. Peter, and the census confirms that it was in St. Peter. He had a windmill. He had 211 acres. He had 80 enslaved individuals, and he had a fuzzy score of 100. What's a fuzzy score? Fuzzy score means it's a perfect match. And so because they use different spelling at different times, back then, like names like Foster might start with two F's, might be recorded with two F's, or Thomas would be TH dot, that's it, or John was JNO dot. They didn't always match up. So your fuzzy score might not be 100, it might be 80, or something like that. But anyway, you can kind of use this as a bit of a tool to help you, especially if you know where your family came from, or where your grandparents came from. You can look at this map and start clicking around and see where they might have, historically began their journey. The manuscripts themselves, uh, the one on the left is the original document, which is held in the library in London. And you can see they had beautiful handwriting, but trying to read that and transcribe that takes some time. The second version is the one on the right, is the version that is held in the National Archives of Barbados. This is the one that the Church of Latter-day Saints went in and copied and have on microfilm. And like I said, if you go into one of their history centers, which isn't so easy if you live in Barbados, you can actually access this full document. Interesting enough, when I went in there, I could access it on their computer. When I used the same address on my computer when I left, it wouldn't let me access it. They were been working some magic there on that. But anyway, as you can see from this little page, down near the middle, there is a John Webster, and we had a John Webster in 1869, probably the son of the one that had his cheek branded, and he owned 5 acres. And this is where the interesting part of genealogy, one of those little holes that pops up and hits you in the face, was he actually, it's recorded that he had one enslaved individual. A little sobering. Demographics. Here is the breakdown from this census. The landowners by parish and in Bridgetown. How much land, how many acres were developed by this time. And this is 50 years after the island was settled. And those mahogany trees were big, and the bush was big. And you see it when you drive around Barbados now, where the bush is coming back. Um, that had to be hard work, cleaning that and then trying to build the crops. A lot of the servants by this time, when Barbados was first settled, those early years, most of the workers they had were these indentured servants from England or Ireland. Um, Poor people who had signed up for a better life, that if they came to work in the plantation, they at the end of 4 years they could get 10 acres of land. Unbeknownst to them, that at the end of their term, a lot of times there was no land available, so they packed up and left to go elsewhere. And then there was during the Civil War, there was more people sent over by Cromwell who maybe been sent for longer terms, 8 or 10 years, and a lot of those people probably didn't survive. And then during this period, the enslaved population was growing. In 1655, the the landowner, the white population, was greater than the enslaved African population. But by the time of this census, um, and going on for the next, uh, well, pretty well going on forever, the population that the of enslaved Africans and then those people born in Barbados exceeded the white population. So our little database here. And we're going to go into this. You can actually we'll look up people's names if you want, and we'll show you how it all works. But basically, what I did was I was reading an article, and it popped up and hit me in the face because it said that somebody at some university had taken an old hieroglyphic or some Sumerian uh, transcription that nobody had been able to decipher for thousands of years and had used AI to decipher this. And I got thinking, I says, wow. And previously, myself and Francis Ward, and you can find these, had transcribed over 4,000 entries from the Sugarworks records from the Barbados archive, Barbados handbooks and almanacs. And I thought, I just can't go through that again. But I was really interested in making this census available. And so I said, well, I'm going to try AI on this. And I learned a little bit about AI, definitely. So first off, I'm just going to upload the whole document. And pretty soon I kind of choked on that and started to, what I realized what I was getting back was a bit of gobbledygook. So then I started doing one page at a time. I would actually take the document, create an image from the one page, upload that, ask it to transcribe it into a spreadsheet. So it did that, and I was going along happy, 30, 40 pages. And then I started to go back and I realized, hmm, some of this information is not right, and some of it's not in the right columns. So I learned very quickly after some frustrations is that you really, if you're using AI for anything, it's amazing for getting that information onto a spreadsheet that you can work with, but you have to know your information and you have to double check it. That's my takeaway from this whole experience. And the other thing that it was doing, um, and we'll call it hallucinations, I guess is what it's called, is it would actually start to ask you if you wanted a bit of a story to go with this information. And it might have some factual information and at one end, and it might have some factual information at the other. But if there was information in the middle that was missing, because it seems to love telling a story, it was kind of create a story. And I would be looking at this and say, hold on here, that's not quite right, and you go back and say, that's not right. And then it would kind of rewrite it. So just buyer beware. It worked well for this project in that I caught on to it soon enough to check everything. But now I know if I'm going to take any kind of a project like this, uh, and use AI, you really need to be careful and you need to know your information. Plus, the problem is everything you put into AI, it stores. So the next time you maybe ask a question, if it's interpreted wrong, um, it's not going to go back to the original source. It's going to tell you a story based on that wrong information. Okay. I hope that's helped. We're going to get into the database here in a second and just pop through some of it. So just a few tips for solving your puzzle and sort of making that link with your family, your family name, back through the years, and is search the census database for possible family matches. And it might be your grandmother's name, your father's name, your great grandmother's names. And because you learn very quickly as every generation, there isn't just one name, there's at least two names because everybody's got a spouse. And then how do I find that spouse's name? So you're it's like this. So I would say stay with the core name, and slowly over time you can branch out. Talk to your family members. Talk to the oldest person that you know in your family. Find those 100-year-old Barbadians and see if they know anybody that you're related to. Because I wish, even though I was interested in this, and I was very lucky that my dad took an interest in it and really wrote based on some research one of his cousins had done, wrote a history of the Barbados, of the Webster family in Barbados going back to the 1600s, and he tied it into historical events and stuff. So that was a huge help, but most people aren't going to have that. So and now I'm saying, talk to the older people. Well, I guess for my grandkids or my nieces and nephews, they'll have to talk to me, and I wish I'd done more talking to have more information. Use the maps. Use the old maps. If you go on Beijing and things, there's over 80 old maps, and you can zoom in on the area of interest. Whether it be Welchman Hall or Foster's, and you'll see over the centuries, you'll be able to see those names and see where they change and have they changed or not. And they do when it's sold. Sometimes they name nowadays, or when sugar was big in the 70s, most plantations had an established name. They didn't change with the families, but in the earlier centuries, they did change when the plantation was sold. DNA testing helps. I mean, it just helps narrow it down. And some trouble is there's so many people doing DNA testing. You've got to really be careful in that you can end up with cousins 5 generations out there. You want to try and find the ones that are as close as possible and contact them. And I've had, like for me, I just had some of the best experiences with my DNA matches. I've got family that I didn't know existed, um, close family, and we've worked together and on family research, just sharing stories, and become really close friends. And I mean, I think that's the big thing, that the biggest takeaway I've had from doing the family history is I have a much bigger family now, and a much better understanding of family and appreciation for them. Not that my brothers and sisters, don't rate up there, but these other family members, it's just nice to have them. Um, Join the genealogical Facebook group, visit the archives, use the resources of the library. Contact Harriet. She is a wealth of information and she is helpful and she can access so much stuff for you. They've got a lot of stuff there. Utilize it. The legacies of British slavery database. I mean, and the slave registries. For a place like Barbados, this is a huge amount of information. I mean, from the time they decided they were going to finally abolish slavery in the West Indies or British Empire, from 1814, every enslaver, plantation over, had to send in a list of the people, the enslaved people that they were under their care or ownership, or however you wanted to say it. Probably not ownership, but anyway, they had to submit these lists every year, and so the idea was that it's the only way they could get them to uh, emancipate end slavery was to compensate these owners. And so they didn't want them at the last day saying they had 200 people when they had one. So they had to send these records in over the years. But what that does, those databases have been kept. So you can go in there if you know the location, the plantations, a family name, a first name of a relative, ancestor. You can look them up in these databases, and that helps with the search as well. Bayesian things, our goal is, I mean, I'm just one little piece of Bayesian things. They tell all these great stories and have a lot of information. John Knox has done amazing work on the Quakers, and it's another example. But anything that I've worked on and with Francis Ward and um, Linda Lewis and stuff, we put them up on Bayesian things, and Peter there has been a huge help. And so all that information, go there, take a look at it. It's all free. You can access it, and hopefully it helps you on your journey. I think the big takeaway for me just before we go into the database itself, I think I've still got a couple of minutes, is just this builder's wall. No matter who you are in Barbados, I think oh, this builder's wall is worth a visit because no matter who you are and where you came from and what your story is, we're all builders. We're all part of the Barbados story, and all the names that are on that wall. It's humbling to see them all, and you probably find your family name there. So go take a look at it. It's worth it. And I'd like to thank Nicole for letting me use her video, which I thought was going to work, but it didn't. But anyway, it'll give you an idea of the what's on that wall. So when I started this, I was going to think I'm going to call this talk genealogy is not for wimps, because you've got this giant puzzle, and you'll spend years and hours working on it, and you'll discover some things about your family that maybe aren't pleasant, and but you're also going to make uncover some wonderful stories and meet some wonderful people. So stick with it. I thought this little quote in a 1712 document was very appropriate for a time. It was written about memoirs of the earliest settlers of Barbados up to 1712, and they were taking their stories and trying to record them. And I thought this, with Barbados election coming up and some of the stuff going on in the world, I thought it was a great little quote. A good governor will never make ill use of his power to gratify his passions and serve his purposes, nor appropriate those advantages to one particular person, which ought to be enjoyed in common by all. When once all esteem is lost, hatred and contempt will soon follow. It ought surely to be the capital interest of all governors. Okay, Langan map, and where's my link to there we are, Bayesian things right here. Okay, we're finally, after that long-winded introduction, we're finally at the database, I hope. Okay, you'll get some background here on the database story, but when you actually get down here, and the way this database works, and all the databases on Bayesian things, they go across like this. So because the column is not wide enough to show all the data and all the columns, you have to scroll across to the left or right. So if you're getting in there and say, well, this is frustrating, it doesn't really tell me what I want to see, it's all there. It's just some of it's hidden. But what you can do with any of the data we've uploaded is you can make a copy of it. And if I click this, it's going to make a copy of all 2,951 entries. that you'll put in your clipboard, or you can print it off, or you can save it in Excel. And for, or you can just do a search on a family name. And we talked about Mr. Webster earlier. So there we go. There was, if we, this is 1769. There was one John Webster. He lived in Christchurch. He owned 5 acres of land, and he had one enslaved individual. Robert Webster, he lived in Bridgetown. So he was probably a merchant or a shoemaker or something, and he had one servant. And it's possible that Robert and John were brothers. There were a few Websters at that time. Um, in the database, there's actually, under the shipping records or the passenger list, there's a couple of Websters that are on those passenger lists. And they, looking at them the way they're recorded, it looks to me like they're actually indentured servants who time it come up and they were taking passage and they were both headed off to Boston. So you can go in here, you can put in another name. Well, I'd hope I'm not, we talked about Wald. Let's see if there's a Waldron. There's a Thomas Waldron, Henry Waldron, there's a junior and senior. They owned quite a bit of property. So even though he attempted that coup on the governor, the family stuck around. So they were there for a few generations. And so you can go in there, play around, put some family names in, and it'll give you some information on where they lived. And then you can go to the map and you say, okay, now it's in St. John. I can find them on the map, and you can click in. And then you can go to Mall's map, which is in the early 1700s, look at that map, and then go up to the 1812 map. And you can kind of start to build a little bit of a story on where your family lived. I think in conclusion, I mean, I think we stick with it. It can be interesting. It can be frustrating. But I think especially in a place in Barbados, it's such an interesting story. When you consider, I mean, for me, I'm always blown away by this, is where it's not a perfect world and it's not a perfect world in Barbados, but considering where the island has come from, I'm always impressed with how strong the people are, whatever their bias may be. But they're to me they should be proud, and they should be proud of their heritage. I'm glad that I have that heritage. Okay, I think I'm just about done, and I think I went 2 minutes over. So, so if anybody has a question.
Thank you so much, Jim. I mean, that was fantastic. Lots of information, a great job. You didn't tell us how long it took, but the way you marry technology and the records to make the information more accessible and user-friendly is fantastic. But before you tell me that, we actually had some questions that were coming in even before you were finished. So let's just speak to those. We have Tammy. Are there ship records?
Yes.
Oh, so we asked about shipwreck. Yes. Can you see it? So she's basically asking if there are shipwreckers. And you did speak to voyages. So you can, if you wish to speak to this, Jim.
Yeah. So in that, actually, it's interesting. There are ship records available. There's you can find those, Google those books and find them. But also, when you go to Page and Things, if you come down here where our key reference sources, where the original lists of persons of quality, that's the Houghton uh, document, and the omitted chapters, they both have because they don't just pertain to Barbados. They actually must have found a bunch of extra boxes of stuff that they thought in their spare time they'd transcribe. So there's a lot of the passenger lists, ship passenger lists, and that show ships leaving from London to the Americas to Barbados, and you can go in and look through those. But there is another book that is out there that pertains to passenger lists as well into the colonies out of London. And read the Colby book where he does a very or thesis. He does a very in-depth study of the passengers, indentured passengers coming out of Bristol, and so there is stuff. Again, you got to dig a little bit, but it's available. And any of those books that I've got, I will be passing on to Harriet so that the museum has those old books that if they don't have them already.
Yeah. Thank you. Tammy asked a follow-up. She didn't catch the name of the map you were mentioning, but I think that was a Ford map you mentioned.
Yes, and
Yes.
it's listed as under 1875, I think, under the former, or 1675, sorry.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have J. Scott. That person asked if there's a correlation with the book of Halls, Hills, and Holes, place names of Barbados.
Oh,
Did you use
that
that in any way in your project, Jim?
I didn't use it for this project, but I would recommend that book like 100%. It's available at the museum, and the work that they did putting those old place names together, because a lot of those places with the development in Barbados have now started to disappear, or they're just the name on a signpost. But and Harry, you can correct me as to who the author was. Was it Marshall?
Yes. So Woodville Marshall was the principal. You also have Pat Stafford, Tara Innes, Carl Watson, and of course that was also several other contributors who would have assisted with the parish information.
Because what that book does is it takes all these obscure little names that you maybe heard of, and the one that I was particularly interested in Penny Hole, and it kind of gives you a paragraph on the history of that place and tells you where it is, and it kind of brings the story to life. And those places are disappearing. And so I really think that's an amazing book. The other place I looked for was Little Diamond in St. Philip's. And uh, my man on the ground in Barbados, Mohammed, he went out and because I'd read about it, and he went out there and he says, "Okay, Jim, when you come to Barbados next, this is how you're going to find it. It's behind this church, and so it's these 5 acres." So it's a good book.
Thank you. And the museum, I just want to let persons know that that book is available in the museum bookshop. It was published by the museum and it's available right here in our bookshop. J. Scott, I'd asked you to look up Harris of St. Lucie, but I think that person can look up because the website is on their net on Beijing things, so they
Yeah,
can look up that Harris themselves.
yeah, they can just pop it in and oh yeah, and this is where that map I told about that they can click in and zoom right in and click on those little buttons and get the details. But yes, if they come to the site here, they can just
Hmm.
add the name in and they'll come up, and then they can print that. So when it says here copy, so say you've searched on the name Wilson, there's probably no Wilson, but if you searched on Wilson and there was 5 of them, if you click copy, it'll give you a printout of the Wilson, just those 4 entries, not the whole database. So you can really narrow it down.
Okay, thank you. And that can be used to look up any name.
Yeah.
All right, Peter Burton has asked a question. This is a long one. Jim, can you tell us a bit more about the two copies of the 1679 census? The original one sent by Governor Sir Jonathan Atkins to London in 1680, which is held at the UK National Archives. A second copy held in Barbados in two leather-bound ledgers. This is a handwritten transcript of the original Barbados 1679 census. And this is the version held by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Do we know when the copy of the 1679 copy held in the archives was created? Okay.
I don't know the exact year it was created, but I believe looking at it that it was definitely a copy of the original. And I remember reading a few years ago that around 1890, there was a lot of the old records were disintegrating, and there was a project in Barbados to go around and transcribe a lot of the church records. And so a lot of times when you're on Family Search and you're looking up your family history, those copies that you're looking at there are not the real originals. They are transcribed copies that were done in this big, huge transcription project around 1890 or so. And somebody else here might know the exact year, but that's what I think happened here is the two bound volumes that are at the archives in Barbados are transcriptions of the original document. Because when you look at the two handwriting, the one is definitely written in Old English.
Yeah, thank you for that. Ben Smith, he wants to thank you for all the work, not just for this transcription, but for getting all of this up to the website. And he also asks, what are some reasons, if any, that an English subject might not have appeared in the 1679 Barbados census?
An English subject that was an indentured servant, was a wife, or was a child, would not be listed. It would have been the the homeowner, or the house, the landowner would have been listed, but the other ones wouldn't have been. Now, if you go to the 1715 census, right here, wherever that is, that one. Anyway, it's a blue book called Barbados in America. They actually list the residents that were living in a house. They list the partner's name, the children's name, the ages. Unfortunately, that book, the 1715 census, is very difficult to get because the fellow who produced that book, Mr. Kent, died. He passed on the books to a member of the Genealogical Society or group, Jim Lynch, who was making those available. And then about 4 years ago, he passed away, and all of the books, all the stuff was disposed of. And I just found this out about a week ago. It was hope because people were asking about it, but I did contact his ex-wife, and I told her I had a copy of the book, and she said that if I would like to transcribe it, she had no objection to that. It's a big book, but it's definitely needs to be preserved. It is available again on the family history and the Latter-day Saints sites, and I'm sure, Harry, you probably have a copy at the museum and the library as well.
Yes, we do have a copy in our library here. Okay, all right, so we have, hello? We have Alison Stall.
Oh, Alison, hi.
Right, how about the newspapers, Jim? Did you use these much? As a Guyanese historian and researcher, the Beijing newspapers especially carry a wealth of information on Guyana, often drawn by the colonial Guyana news sheets. And she gave a website. So did you use any newspapers, Jim?
I've used them and I've looked them up, and it's nice that those have now been digitized and available, the Barbados Mercury and the other early newspapers. But I didn't use them for this particular project.
Okay, thank you. We want persons to know that those early newspapers are available at the Digital Library of the Caribbean, the newspapers that Jim was just referring to. Okay, for the persons who are interested in asking about the recording of this session, yes, this will be on our YouTube channel. So you can actually go back to our past presentations, which have all been archived on the museum's YouTube channel. We have a name, I'm not sure that I can pronounce it, Gibre. Yeah, let's stay with that one. Thank you for this presentation. Were there any records of indigenous people either present on Barbados or of any that were brought in to help cultivate the land?
Yes, not in the census, but in Richard Lingen's book, he has a story there about two indigenous people. And subsequently, I think Carl Watson wrote about this book about their story, and I can't remember. I can't Arco or I can't remember exactly their names, but they and it was kind of a sad story. Uh, but the ones that Captain Powell brought over, we don't know the names of. The two in this story is that one of them. Or she fell in love with a sailor, got on the boat, came to Barbados, and then once she was in Barbados, he was no longer interested, and she was put into slavery. I think that's how the story goes, Harriet.
Yeah, that's a story of Inkle and Yarako.
Yeah.
And for persons who are interested, there's actually a memorial, so to speak, at Kendall Plantation, what they call the Yarako Pond. Apparently that was a plantation where she lived, where this event occurred. So you can go there. There's a small interpretation there at Kendall. But the story has been written about quite widely. We have, okay, someone wants the Bayesian Things link again. I think it is www.bayesianthings.com or .org.
.com. .com. Beijing thing.
.com, right.
Yeah,
So, right, so it's Bayesian Things, just the www in front of it, .com.
correct.
Charmaine, good afternoon from New York. She wants to know, what does persons of quality mean? I think she's referring to Houghton's.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how they determine if somebody is a quality person or not, because maybe some of these, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, but I will look into it. Thanks for asking that.
Okay, we have another one from J. Scott. Do you have any, well, yes, if we have any British military records from the late 1700s to the early 1800s? My ancestor enlisted in the British Army in Dublin. He may have been brought from Barbados to Dublin. He was a servant and enlisted when he was about 15. He ended up settling in Canada after the War of 1812. What I can tell you is that we do not have the military records here at the museum in our library. This is usually the British Archives. So, Jim, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think there was there's two reference points I can think of, and one is by is a Jerome Handler, who was a did extensive research on Barbados, and he did a paper on the Barbados militia. And then there was another fellow named Campbell, P. Campbell. He actually wrote something, and it's in one of the journals because there was an article published in the Barbados Museum and Historical Society journal about the Barbados militia. So
Mm-hmm.
so those so those are the two sources that I can think of
Right.
where you
So
might find that.
right, so there are militia records, which will more be local militia on plantations.
Hmm.
But for this person, J. Scott, a resource that I can think of is something called the Army List. I am not sure how far they go back to, but they were digitized by the National Library of Scotland. I did use them for a project, but I cannot remember if they went as far back as the 1700s. But you can have a look at that. But and of course, websites such as Find My Past, those websites that are heavily have military records, and of course the British Archive.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. We have James. Is there a way to research when rum business started? So I assume we mean the rum business here in Barbados.
Is that Mr. Crozier?
This is James Webster. Actually, what I can tell James, is that you, Jim?
No, it's not me. It's my cousin. It's it,
Oh,
it's
okay.
the
Okay. Uh,
it's the other Jim Webster.
okay. Actually, Dr. Henderson Carter, his PhD thesis was on the development of rum in Barbados. So that is a place that you can begin
Mhm.
looking at his thesis. We in the journal, in our journal, we have uh, in the Lucas manuscripts, we have a list of three houses plantation, which mentions, and this was very early, 16 something, which
Uh,
shows the the equipment used for rum making and rum being mentioned. So, but for sure, Dr. Carter's thesis may be a good place to begin.
yeah. And I think if he goes to any rum shop and sits down and chats with the guys, they could probably give him some background as well, firsthand work.
Very much so. Okay, so anonymous attendee. It sounds like the searchable database only has names of people who own plantations. Is that true?
Yes. No, it's not true. Anybody who lived in Bridgetown wouldn't have owned a plantation. They would have been a tradesperson. They would have been a shopkeeper or something. So the 400 people that were in Bridgetown were probably not plantation owners. And it's also the other interesting thing about the census. It has a listing of in Bridgetown of over 50 Jewish residents. And at that time, there was quite a big Jewish population, and they were quite well received and accepted into the society at that time. And a lot of those had come um, out of Brazil by way of the Netherlands, and then they went to Brazil when the Dutch had a colony there, and then the Portuguese took over part of Brazil, and some of those people left because the Portuguese and the Spanish still had their inquisitions going on. And so some of these people came here, and that's where a lot of the early sugar knowledge came from, was through those people, through the Jewish people.
Yeah. Actually, just last night, our deputy director he delivered a lecture which you will find on our museum YouTube channel, which speaks to the connections also between Barbados and New York and those places. And this goes into Wanda Lundy. She says, when a name is not available for the enslaved, how do you recommend finding the enslaved families? Is it possible to determine if enslaved persons in New Jersey, New York might be connected to landowners in Barbados? All right, before Jim mentions this, I'll remind you what I just said about Kevin Farmer's presentation, so you should have a look at that. You can also, on our website, we also have presentations by Seth Camel, who is a historian who lives in New York, but deals a lot with the New York Barbados connection. And we also have another presentation by Donna Marie Barnes, who is connected to Sylvester Manor on Shelter Island, which speaks to the connection between Shelter Island and Barbados. So I refer Wanda to those resources. And Jim, you can. Oh, and before I go over to Jim, there's actually a ongoing project now with the University of the West Indies and Sylvester Manor looking at that connection. And Dr. Henderson Carter, who I just mentioned as it relates to rum, he is the lead researcher on that project. Jim?
Yes, I'm not sure. I think I'm not sure how to answer that because I haven't really studied that. There's other people that have studied that more. I would think it depends a lot on when you go to the genealogy site, you see a lot of people that don't live in Barbados. They're trying to get connections. So if you have any kind of a connection or family names, and putting that up there on the genealogical site, Facebook page, that's a good start. I know there's another person who's in the group, Sandra Edie, who's done quite a bit of research in that area, and when I was talking to her before this presentation, she said, getting those family names and trying to narrow down a place of residence and kind of working from there is kind of how her approach has always been.
Yes. Look, I can also mention to Wanda, it's not only New Jersey and New York. Remember, because of Barbados' particular position, there was also movement to the other parts of the USA. So there are connections to South Carolina. When the Barbadians went to settle South Carolina, they would have taken their enslaved population with them. So looking at places like Middleton Place and Magnolia Plantation and so on to see what records they have could also be helpful.
Okay. I just got a message from somebody here, Sandra. She's saying I had my hand up.
Oh, sorry. Let's see. Anastasia, can you allow Sandra to speak?
Yes, one moment, please.
There
Hello.
she is. Hi, Sandra.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Hi,
Okay.
Sandra.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Ivana. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Okay.
Jim, I just want to thank you for bringing these documents to the fore. And there are a couple of questions that I heard that are a couple of things that I probably can speak to, and I hope you don't mind me chiming in.
No, not at all.
Oh, okay. So one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that naming is very layered and complex in Barbados, and the surnames that we see coming down through our ancestry, some are by biology, and then others are just by attachment to those families that own plantations. But a lot of it also is that our names don't necessarily come from the planters. I've found that many of our names come from the plantation administration, the legal administration, the day-to-day people who are running the plantation. And I don't know, well, I suppose some of those names would be on the list, but those would be the second tier. So you have the owners who may have a big condominium in Bath in Wales, where the plantation is investment property. He may never even see that property. And then you have those who were local and actually living there. And then you have the people who worked for them. And I'm suggesting that we look at all those places when we think of our surnames. And particularly, I think the people who were servants who had more day-to-day access and interactions with the enslaved people on the plantations. And some of those names may very well be biological in connection versus the owner per se. And also, as far as the connections to overseas to, I think, South Carolina for sure. Some of those connections go way back, and sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's a recent connection. Maybe somebody was connected to someone, during one of the migrant farm worker connections, or whether it's somebody a lot earlier, like in the 1800s. But so naming is complex and it's very interesting, but I think starting with ourselves and working backwards and focusing on those locations, we can learn a lot about the people that we interacted with on a daily basis and some of their story to help round out our family stories if you're in the enslaved population or descended
So,
from.
thank you, Sandra. So
All
just
right.
adding to that,
Thank you,
if-
Sandra.
You're welcome. Have
Yeah.
a
so
thank you.
just adding to
Okay.
that, if you look at the other table that we did earlier, that is about the Barbados handbooks and almanacs, there's 4,000 entries there going back to 1848. And in those, they actually have the owners, but they also, wherever it was listed, they actually have the plantation managers. So there's a whole nother list of names that may link into your family as well.
Thank you. And that is available on Beijing Things as well. So for those of you who are new to the group and wondering about the museum, this is the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. You will see the name on our flyer and contact details as well. Okay, Linda, very well done, Jim. I am researching in late 1600s and early 1700s, trying to make connections. This has fired me up again.
Oh, that's good.
Okay.
It's so brain overwhelming. You have to take breaks. You have to go away, and then there's something that gets you going again. And you asking me to do this presentation got me going again because I didn't want to come on here and look like an idiot.
You did it for sure. We actually have a definition of persons of quality.
Oh,
In Barbados history, persons of quality, PQ, refer to the white planter class, wealthy land-owning British settlers who dominated the island's slave-based sugar economy, holding significant social, political, and economic power, especially the ruling elite distinct from enslaved Africans and indentured laborers. They were the establishment defined by their ownership of estates, slaves, and wealth derived from sugar, shaping colonial Barbados's hierarchical social society. Right. Referred, okay. Yes, okay. So that is, so basically, persons of quality, according to this definition, the persons in the upper echelons of the society, the owners and shapers of the society.
That's why the family name's not on that list.
Okay, so Peter is reminding persons that you can access Bayesian things via HTTPS colon / BayesianThings.com or HTTPS colon / www.BayesianThings.com. But if you cannot remember the URL, if you put in Bayesian Things, it comes up.
Yeah. If you
And
put
then
in
you will see, because there's a whole lot of information there. You just check for the one that you require. Okay, we have David O'Carroll. David O'Carroll is also giving us a definition. It says, Chat GPT, persons of quality refer to individuals of notable social standing, such as gentry, nobility, or those with significant social status. I think the two definitions coincide. Okay, we have Roger B. My ancestors, Eliza and John Corbin, were enslaved on a plantation owned by Mr. Hines in 1834. Where would I start looking to find their ancestors? I would like to figure out how we get the Corbin name.
Well, yeah. So her name is Corbin, and she was on the
Plantation
plantation
owned
owned by
by
Corbin.
Hines, yes.
Yeah,
So I think, because you did mention, for example, the slave registers as one of the important documents, and 1834 would have been the last register. So
Yes.
then they want to try to find a Eliza and a John. They may not have the name Corbin, but on this Mr. Hines, this plantation in 1834, and try to work forward from there. They can work backwards because the Barbados slave registers begin in 1817 for every about 3 years or so. So they can utilize those to see what they can find about Eliza and John, and then try to work forward from there.
Yeah, if they Google legacies of British slavery, it'll take her right to the page where she can put the names in, put the plantation owners' names in, and do a search on Barbados, and there they'll all the names will be listed. So she may actually be able to pick those people out from those lists. Good luck with that.
Okay, so Roger, yes, that is a point to begin. And you can also, as Jim mentioned earlier, there's a Facebook group called Barbados Genealogy. And I'm sure there are people there who are researching the Corbin family. So you may wish to join that group and plug in your question there as well. David Gleave, he wants to know do you know if anything like this is being done for Guyana?
Ah, that's a good project for Allison. I don't know myself if anything has been done like this. I'm sure there's got to be records in Guyana, but I'm not aware of them. I haven't looked into that.
Okay. All right.
Can I chime in here on Guyana? They are Guyana yearbooks that have the names of many of the clerks and different government officials who went down to Guyana. The establishment of Guyana as a colony was facilitated by Barbados in many ways, British Guyana. And so there are listings of many of the clerks and the policemen and all these different people who went to work in Guyana. And of course, there were also laborers who went down. And so those lists can be found in Google and other databases.
Yes, there's also a list with Van Putten Voices, British Guyana. Remember with British Guyana for colonists. So that may be another list that David, you can have a check British Guyana colonies, and that's online. Oops. Hello? Right. Okay. Oh, Linda is letting the person who asked about the Corbins know that the Corbins had plantations in St. Peter, St. Lucie, and he said Hines is also in the area. I think Corbins was also in St. Andrew, and Hines was also in St. Andrew. So they may want to check those out. All right, let's see, because we had you for quite a while, Jim. So let's see if there's anyone else. Beth Mills, thanks, Jim, for all your detective skills and amazing perseverance. In your estimation, would many of the persons enumerated in Bridgetown also have owned land counted under the plantations?
There's some duplication. So if people own land, some people were in the records like twice, but for the most part, the Bridgetown people, I don't see that there was a lot of land associated with them. So I would say for the most part, I would say no.
Okay.
So and Beth, if she's still listening, I'm still looking for one more leg for my planter's chair.
Okay, so I think that's the last question for now. Well, right. So I think we will try to wrap up now, Jim. This was an amazing presentation. We learned so much about the census. We're looking forward to seeing something like this being done for the 1715 census.
Give me now that I've been warned, right?
Yeah, and it is really great how you are using technology. So perhaps at some point you may have some generic presentation on using technology in your family research, how you can enhance, other things, not just census documents, but how you can use technology to your advantage. That's just throwing that out there. But but for today, thank you so much. It has been great. We had some wonderful interaction. Thank you so much for the persons who have asked questions and the persons who attended. We had a very good audience.
Yeah.
So thank you all so much. Thanks, Anastasia, for keeping us on point. And I just want to remind persons that this presentation will be on the museum's YouTube channel. If it's not streamed immediately, Anastasia will let me know, and I usually send out a link for the others who may not be on my mailing list. They can check in a week or so, and it would be there. So thanks again so much, Jim.
Thank
Our
you.
audience. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody,
And
today.
Anastasia, I wish you all the best. Have a good evening. Safe travels for those of you who have to travel home. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Sandra. Okay, now.